The story of Rome, a city destined to shape the very foundations of Western civilization, truly begins not in the bustling forum or beneath the arches of triumph, but in the realm of myth and whispered legend, long before the first stone was ever truly laid. It was a tale spun from the dust of fallen Troy and carried across the wine-dark sea, a narrative that would imbue the nascent city with a sense of divine purpose and an unyielding destiny. Imagine, if you will, the flickering firelight in ancient huts, the murmurs of elders recounting the epic journey of Aeneas, a Trojan prince, fated to escape the burning ruins of his homeland. He was said to have carried his aged father, Anchises, on his shoulders, and led his young son, Ascanius, by the hand, a poignant image of past, present, and future intertwined. This arduous voyage, chronicled later by Virgil in his Aeneid, was not merely a flight, but a sacred quest. Guided by omens and divine pronouncements, Aeneas, after years of wandering and trials that mirrored the very struggles of early settlers, eventually landed on the shores of Latium, a fertile plain in central Italy. Here, he was said to have forged an alliance through both diplomacy and conflict with the native Latins, eventually marrying Lavinia, the daughter of King Latinus. From this union, or perhaps from his son Ascanius, sprang a lineage that would, generations later, culminate in the birth of twins whose destiny was inextricably linked with the very soil of Rome. Centuries passed, or so the legends tell us, a span of time filled with the rise and fall of minor kings in the Alban Hills, descendants of Ascanius. The stage was slowly being set for the dramatic arrival of Romulus and Remus, the iconic founders. Their story is perhaps one of the most enduring and evocative of all Roman myths, a narrative steeped in abandonment, survival, and ultimately fratricide. It begins with Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, who was said to have been impregnated by the god Mars himself, giving birth to the twins. Her uncle, Amulius, fearing a challenge to his usurped throne, ordered the infants to be cast into the Tiber River. Yet fate, or perhaps the will of the gods, intervened. The basket carrying the babes drifted ashore at the foot of the Palatine Hill, where they were discovered and suckled by a she-wolf, the Lupa Capitolina, an enduring symbol of Rome's fierce, nurturing spirit. Later, a shepherd named Faustulus found them, and with his wife Acca Larentia, raised them as their own. This humble upbringing, far from the machinations of royalty, instilled in them a rugged independence and a deep connection to the land. As they grew into strong, charismatic young men, they discovered their true lineage and, with a swift act of justice, restored their grandfather Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa. But their destiny lay elsewhere, not in the shadow of an established city, but in the creation of their own. They chose the very spot where they had been saved, the hills overlooking the Tiber. Here, however, a fundamental dispute arose, a conflict over which hill would host the new city and who would rule it. Romulus favoured the Palatine, Remus the Aventine. They sought divine approval through augury, observing the flight of birds. Remus claimed to see 6 vultures first, but Romulus then saw 12. This ambiguity, this clash of interpretations, led to a fateful confrontation. In a moment of passion, perhaps fueled by pride or a perceived transgression, Romulus slew Remus. The precise circumstances remain shrouded in myth. Was it during a quarrel over the city's nascent walls, Remus mocking Romulus by leaping over them, or a more direct, brutal act? Historians still debate the exact nature of this foundational murder, but its symbolic weight is undeniable. Rome was born from an act of violence, a sacrifice that perhaps foreshadowed its future conquests and internal struggles. With Remus gone, Romulus became the sole founder. Rum and first king of the city, which he named Roma after himself. This was said to have occurred on April 21st, 753 BCE, a date meticulously calculated by later Roman scholars and celebrated annually. The new city, perched on the Palatine Hill, faced an immediate challenge: a lack of inhabitants, particularly women, to ensure its future. Romulus, ever pragmatic, devised a cunning plan. He invited the neighbouring Sabines to a festival, a grand celebration, and amidst the revelry, his men seized the Sabine women. This audacious act, known as the rape of the Sabine women, though abduction or seizure is a more accurate translation of the Latin raptio, led to war. Yet remarkably, the Sabine women themselves intervened, stepping between their Roman husbands and their Sabine fathers and brothers, pleading for peace. This powerful act of reconciliation led to a unique merger. The Romans and Sabines united, sharing the city and its governance, a testament to Rome's early capacity for assimilation and growth through unexpected alliances. Thus began the period of the Roman monarchy, a foundational era that, according to tradition, lasted for over 2 centuries, from 753 BCE to 509 BCE. During this time, Rome was ruled by 7 kings, each said to have contributed significantly to the city's development and institutions. While the exact details of their reigns are often blurred by legend and later embellishment, they represent a crucial phase in Rome's evolution, from a small settlement to a nascent regional power. The first, of course, was Romulus, who not only founded the city, but also established its initial political structures. He is credited with creating the Roman Senate, an advisory body composed of 100 of the city's most prominent men, known as the patres, fathers, whose descendants would form the patrician class. He also divided the populace into 30 curiae, electoral units that would play a role in early Roman assemblies. Romulus was also a military leader, expanding Rome's territory through conquest, and is said to have mysteriously disappeared in a storm, ascending to godhood as Quirinus, the deified spirit of the Roman people. His successor was Numa Pompilius, a Sabine, chosen for his wisdom and piety rather than his military prowess. Numa's reign is remembered as a period of peace and religious reform. He is credited with establishing many of Rome's fundamental religious institutions, including the Vestal Virgins, the Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, and various priestly colleges. He also reformed the calendar, aligning it more closely with the lunar cycle, and built temples, fostering a deep sense of religious observance that would permeate Roman society for centuries. His reign laid the spiritual bedrock of Rome, emphasizing the importance of Pax Deorum, peace with the gods, as essential for the city's prosperity. The third king was Tullus Hostilius, a stark contrast to the peaceful Numa. He was a warrior king, known for his aggressive military campaigns, particularly against Alba Longa, the mother city of Rome. The legendary combat of the Horatii and Curiatii, 3 Roman brothers fighting 3 Alban brothers, is attributed to his reign, a dramatic single combat that decided the fate of the 2 cities without a full-scale war. Tullus Hostilius's reign saw Rome solidify its military might, and expand its dominion. But it was also marked by conflict and a disregard for religious rites, leading, according to some accounts, to his death by divine wrath. Following Tullus came Ancus Marcius, often seen as a blend of Numa's piety and Tullus's martial spirit. He was the grandson of Numa Pompilius and focused on both religious observances and practical expansion. Ancus Marcius is credited with founding Rome's port city of Ostia at the mouth of the Tiber, a crucial development for trade and communication. He also built the first bridge across the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius, and established the Marmet, inner prison, an early Roman jail. His reign saw Rome continue its measured growth and consolidation of power. The next three kings, the Tarquins, are often viewed as a distinct phase, marking a period of Etruscan influence over Rome. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king, was said to have been of Etruscan origin, though he came to Rome as an immigrant. He gained power through wealth and cunning, and his reign marked a significant period of urbanization and architectural development. He drained the Forum area, built the Circus Maximus for chariot races, and began the construction of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, a monumental undertaking that would become the heart of Roman state religion. He also increased the number of senators and introduced many Etruscan customs, including the toga and the fasces, symbols of Roman authority. Servius Tullius, the sixth king, had a humble, even miraculous origin story, said to have been born a slave in the royal household, yet marked by a divine flame on his head. He rose to power through the patronage of Tarquinius Priscus, and later, according to some accounts, through a coup orchestrated by his ambitious wife, the daughter of Priscus. Servius Tullius is renowned for his significant social and military reforms. He instituted the census, a systematic counting and classification of citizens based on wealth, which determined their military obligations and voting rights. This reform, known as the Servian Constitution, created a more organized and equitable military system, and laid the groundwork for the later Roman Republic's assemblies. He also expanded the city's boundaries, building a new circuit of walls, the Servian Wall, encompassing all 7 hills of Rome. His reign, though prosperous, ended tragically. Murdered by his own daughter, Tullia, and her husband, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, in a brutal act of patricide and regicide. The seventh and final king was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. His reign was characterized by tyranny, cruelty, and a blatant disregard for tradition and the Senate. He seized power through violence, refused to consult the Senate, and ruled with an iron fist, executing opponents and imposing harsh levies. He completed the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, but his methods alienated both the patricians and the common people. The catalyst for his downfall was the infamous rape of Lucretia, a virtuous Roman noblewoman, by his son, Sextus Tarquinius. Lucretia, unable to bear the dishonor, took her own life after revealing the crime to her family. This act of egregious injustice ignited a firestorm of outrage, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, who rallied the Roman populace and the Senate against the tyrannical king. In 509 BCE, Tarquin the Proud and his family were expelled from Rome, marking the end of the monarchy and the dawn of a new era. The expulsion of the kings was a pivotal moment, shaping Rome's deep-seated aversion to monarchical rule and its fervent commitment to liberty. The memory of Tarquin's tyranny would forever be a cautionary tale, influencing the very structure of the nascent republic. The Romans, having tasted the bitter fruit of absolute power, resolved to create a system where power was shared, limited, and accountable. This transition from a city ruled by kings to one governed by elected officials and laws was not merely a change in leadership, but a profound transformation of political philosophy, setting the stage for the remarkable journey of the Roman Republic. The myths and deeds of these early kings, though often embellished, provided a foundational narrative, a sense of identity, and a set of values, piety, military prowess, civic duty, that would continue to define the Roman character for centuries to come. The very stones of the city, even then, seemed to hum with the echoes of these ancient tales, whispering of destiny and the relentless march of time. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. The city of Rome, still young and finding its voice, had cast off its kings, or so the story goes, around 509 BCE. This was not a sudden clean break, but rather a tumultuous birth of what would become known as the Roman Republic. Imagine a city no longer ruled by a single supreme monarch, but by a more complex, often fractious system. Power, or at least the illusion of it, began to spread, though not equally. At the heart of this new order were two consuls, elected annually, who held executive power. They commanded the armies, presided over the Senate, and enforced laws. Yet beneath this seemingly balanced facade, deep fissures ran through Roman society, primarily between two distinct classes, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the aristocrats, the descendants of the oldest and most prominent families, who traced their lineage back to the earliest days of Rome. They held most of the wealth, controlled the religious offices, and dominated the Senate, that venerable assembly of elders whose advice, though not legally binding at first, carried immense weight. Their homes, perhaps, were built of sturdier stone, their gardens more expansive, their tables laden with finer fare. They were the ones who could afford the best armor, the finest horses, and who often led the legions into battle, seeing it as their right and duty. The plebeians, on the other hand, comprised the vast majority of the Roman population. They were the common citizens, farmers, artisans, merchants, and laborers. They served in the army, tilled the fields that fed the city, and built the very infrastructure that allowed Rome to grow. Yet, despite their vital contributions, they were largely excluded from political power. They could vote in assemblies, but their votes often counted for less, and they could not hold most public offices, nor could they marry into patrician families. This created a simmering resentment, a sense of injustice that would define the early centuries of the Republic. Imagine the frustration of a plebeian soldier returning from a victorious campaign, only to find himself burdened by debt, unable to voice his concerns in the halls of power, while the patrician general he served under enjoyed the spoils. This struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, was not a single, violent uprising, but a long, drawn-out series of negotiations, threats, and concessions that unfolded over nearly 2 centuries. It began with the famous secession of the plebs, a dramatic act of withdrawal. Around 494 BCE, according to tradition, the plebeians, fed up with their lack of rights and crushing debt, simply walked out of Rome. They marched to a hill outside the city, perhaps the Mons Sacer, and threatened to establish their own city, leaving Rome without its labor, its soldiers, its very backbone. This was a powerful, non-violent protest, a silent scream that echoed through the empty streets of the city. The patricians, realizing the city could not function without them, were forced to negotiate. The result was the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs. These tribunes were sacrosanct. meaning their persons were inviolable. Anyone who harmed a tribune could be put to death. They had the power to veto, to literally say, "I forbid," any act of a magistrate or the Senate that they deemed harmful to the plebeians. This was a revolutionary concept, a check on the power of the elite, and it marked a significant step towards a more equitable, though still imperfect, society. It was as if the city itself sighed, a collective breath of relief and grudging acceptance. The struggle continued, however, for access to the law itself. Before 450 BCE, Roman law was largely unwritten, based on custom and tradition, and interpreted by patrician priests and magistrates. This meant that plebeians often felt that justice was arbitrary, applied unevenly, and manipulated against them. Imagine trying to navigate a legal system where the rules were here known only to a select few, whispered behind closed doors. The demand for written laws became paramount. This led to the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first codified laws, inscribed on bronze tablets and publicly displayed in the Forum. While perhaps not as comprehensive as modern legal codes, they were a monumental achievement, making the law accessible to all citizens, at least in theory. It was a tangible step towards transparency, a glimmer of light in the often shadowed halls of justice. Over time, through persistent pressure and further secessions, the plebeians gradually gained more rights. In 367 BCE, the Licinian Sextian laws were passed, which, among other things, stipulated that one of the 2 consuls elected each year must be a plebeian. This opened the highest office in the Republic to common citizens, a true testament to the power of collective action. By 287 BCE, with the passage of the Lex Hortensia, resolutions passed by the plebeian council, known as plebiscites, gained the force of law for all citizens without needing the approval of the Senate. This effectively brought an end to the conflict of the orders, at least in its most overt form, creating a more unified, if still hierarchical, Roman citizenry. The Republic, forged in these internal fires, was becoming stronger, more resilient. With its internal struggles somewhat settled, Rome began to look outward. The Italian peninsula, a land of fertile plains, rugged mountains, and diverse peoples, lay before it. The early Republic's expansion was not a grand, pre-planned imperial project, but rather a series of defensive wars, opportunistic skirmishes, and strategic alliances. It was a slow, often brutal process, driven by a need for security, resources, and perhaps a burgeoning sense of destiny. One of Rome's earliest and most persistent rivals were the Etruscans, a sophisticated people living to the north of Rome, in what is now Tuscany. They had a rich culture, advanced metallurgy, and a strong maritime presence. Indeed, Rome itself had been ruled by Etruscan kings in its early days. The conflict with the Etruscans was long and drawn out, marked by sieges and pitched battles. A particularly famous, though perhaps legendary event, was the Siege of Veii, a powerful Etruscan city just a few miles north of Rome. The Romans, led by the general Marcus Furius Camillus, are said to have besieged Veii for 10 years, a struggle that mirrored the Trojan War in its epic scope. When it finally fell in 396 BCE, it marked a decisive victory for Rome and significantly expanded its territory and influence. The fall of Veii was not just a military triumph, it was a psychological one, proving Rome's growing might and determination. Yet Rome's rise was not without its setbacks. In 390 BCE, a terrifying event occurred that shook the nascent republic to its core. the sack of Rome by the Gauls. These Celtic warriors, fierce and unpredictable, swept down from the north, defeated a Roman army at the Battle of the Allia, and then marched on the city itself. Most of the Roman population fled, but a small contingent of defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill. The Gauls plundered and burned the city, leaving much of it in ruins. The story goes that the defenders on the Capitoline were saved by the sacred geese of Juno, whose honking alerted them to a stealthy Gallic attack. Rome was eventually ransomed, paying a heavy price in gold. This humiliating defeat, though devastating at the time, served as a powerful lesson. It instilled in the Romans a deep-seated fear of foreign invasion and a fierce resolve to never let such an event happen again. It fueled their military innovations and their relentless drive for security through conquest. After rebuilding, Rome resumed its expansion, often through a combination of military force and shrewd diplomacy. They fought a series of wars against their Latin neighbours, eventually dissolving the Latin League and incorporated many of these cities into the Roman sphere, some as full citizens, others as allies with varying degrees of autonomy. This approach of integrating conquered peoples rather than simply subjugating them was a key factor in Rome's long-term success. It allowed Rome to draw on a vast pool of manpower and resources, strengthening its legions and its economy. The Samnite Wars, a series of 3 major conflicts fought between 343 and 290 BCE, were perhaps the most challenging and defining struggles for Roman dominance in central and southern Italy. The Samnites were a tough, warlike people, inhabiting the rugged Apennine Mountains to Rome's southeast. Their mountainous terrain and guerrilla tactics presented a formidable challenge to the more disciplined Roman legions. These wars were brutal, marked by difficult mountain campaigns and significant Roman defeats, such as the infamous Battle of the Caudine Forks in 321 BCE, where an entire Roman army was trapped in a narrow pass and forced to surrender, enduring the humiliation of passing under the yoke, a symbolic arch of spears. Despite these setbacks, Roman tenacity and superior organization ultimately prevailed. The Samnite Wars forced Rome to adapt, to improve its military tactics and logistics, and to develop the famous manipular legionary system, which allowed for greater flexibility on the battlefield. By the end of the Third Samnite War, Rome had solidified its control over central Italy, pushing its influence southward. The mountains, once a barrier, now felt more like a part of a growing domain. The final major hurdle to Roman control of the Italian peninsula came from the Greek city-states in the south, collectively known as Magna Graecia. These wealthy, culturally rich cities, like Tarentum, had been established centuries earlier and viewed Rome's expansion with suspicion. When Rome began to assert its influence in their region, Tarentum called for aid from Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus, a brilliant Greek general and a distant relative of Alexander the Great. Pyrrhus arrived in Italy in 280 BCE with a formidable army, including war elephants, creatures the Romans had never encountered before. The ensuing Pyrrhic War, 280 to 275 BCE, saw some of the fiercest battles of the early Republic. Pyrrhus initially won 2 major victories, at Heraclea and Asculum. However, these victories came at a terrible cost, earning him the phrase Pyrrhic victory, meaning a win achieved at such a great cost that it amounts to a defeat. His famous lament, "One more such victory and I am lost," perfectly encapsulates the attrition he faced against the seemingly endless Roman reserves of manpower. The Romans, despite their losses, refused to surrender, stubbornly holding out and learning from each encounter. They adapted their tactics, finding ways to counter the elephants and the phalanx. Ultimately, Pyrrhus, exhausted and unable to break Roman resolve, withdrew from Italy. His departure left the Greek cities vulnerable, and Rome soon brought them under its control. By 270 BCE, Rome was the undisputed master of the Italian peninsula. From the northern plains to the southern tip, the various peoples, Etruscans, Latins, Samnites, and Greeks, had been either conquered, allied, or integrated into the growing Roman system. This expansion was not just about military might, it was also about the construction of roads, the establishment of colonies, new Roman settlements in conquered territories, and the extension of Roman law and administration. These colonies served as military outposts, economic centers, and conduits for Roman culture, gradually Romanizing the peninsula. Yet these rapid growth and the very nature of the Republic itself posed new challenges. The system of government, designed for a city-state, was now stretched to govern an entire peninsula. The influx of wealth from conquest, the increasing number of slaves, and the widening gap between rich and poor would sow new seeds of discontent. Historians still debate the precise nature of Roman imperialism during this period. Was it primarily defensive, a reaction to threats from neighbors, or was there an underlying, perhaps unspoken, drive for dominance from the very beginning? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex tapestry woven from fear, ambition, and opportunity. Perhaps the early Romans, looking out from their 7 hills, simply saw an ever-expanding horizon and felt an irresistible urge to fill it with their presence. The Republic, born from the rejection of kings, was now a formidable power, its gaze already drifting beyond the shores of Italy, towards the vast, shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The stage was set for even grander conflicts, and the very character of Rome would be tested in ways its founders could never have imagined. The scent of salt and sun carried on the Mediterranean breeze now mingled with the smoke of ambition. Rome, having woven its intricate web across the Italian peninsula, found itself gazing across the narrow Strait of Messina, where the island of Sicily lay like a stepping stone. And just beyond Sicily, across a vast expanse of shimmering blue, rose the formidable city of Carthage. This was no mere tribal skirmish or regional dispute. This was a clash of titans. 2 burgeoning empires destined to collide for mastery of the world's most vital sea. The stage was set for the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts so brutal, so protracted, that they would forever etch themselves into the annals of history, reshaping not only Rome, but the very fabric of the ancient world. Carthage, a Phoenician colony founded centuries earlier, had grown into a maritime powerhouse. Her fleets, laden with goods from distant lands, dominated trade routes from the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Spain to the eastern Mediterranean. Her wealth was legendary, her navy unrivaled, and her influence stretched across a vast commercial empire. Rome, by contrast, was still primarily a land power, her strength lying in her legions and her meticulously organized military machine. Yet the 2 powers, like tectonic plates, were inexorably drawn together. The immediate spark for the First Punic War, which ignited around 264 BCE, was the city of Messana, in Sicily. A band of Campanian mercenaries, known as the Mamertines, had seized the city and found themselves caught between the competing influences of Carthage and Rome. When Carthage intervened, the Mamertines appealed to Rome for protection, and Rome, perhaps seeing an opportunity to expand its influence or fearing Carthaginian dominance over the straits, answered the call. The initial engagements were, predictably, land-based, with Rome demonstrating its customary military prowess. But the war quickly exposed Rome's Achilles heel, its lack of a strong navy. Carthage ruled the waves, capable of resupplying its forces and harassing Roman coastlines with impunity. This strategic disadvantage forced Rome to undertake an astonishing feat of engineering and determination. Legend has it that the Romans, observing a stranded Carthaginian quinquereme, meticulously copied its design. Building a fleet from scratch in an incredibly short span of time. What they lacked in naval experience, they compensated for with ingenuity. They developed the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge with a spiked end that could be dropped onto an enemy ship, effectively transforming a sea battle into a land battle. This innovation, though cumbersome and at times dangerous to the stability of their own ships, allowed Roman legionaries to board Carthaginian vessels and fight hand-to-hand, negating the superior seamanship of their foes. The First Punic War dragged on for over 2 decades, a grueling test of endurance and resources. Naval battles were fought with ferocity. Storms claimed more ships than any enemy, and the financial strain on both sides was immense. Finally, in 241 BCE, after a decisive Roman naval victory off the Aegates Islands, Carthage, exhausted and bankrupt, sued for peace. The terms were harsh. Carthage was forced to evacuate Sicily, pay a massive indemnity to Rome, and effectively relinquish its naval supremacy. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province, a tangible symbol of its burgeoning power beyond the Italian peninsula. The victory, however, came at a tremendous cost. Rome had suffered immense losses in ships and men, but it had also gained invaluable experience as a naval power, forever changing its military outlook. The peace that followed was uneasy, a mere interlude before the next, even more cataclysmic confrontation. Carthage, smarting from its defeat, turned its attention to Spain, seeking new sources of wealth and manpower. Here, a new figure emerged, a man whose name would forever be synonymous with military genius and unyielding defiance, Hannibal Barca. Raised in the shadow of Carthage's defeat, instilled with a burning hatred for Rome, Hannibal was a brilliant strategist and charismatic leader. His father, Hamilcar Barca, had made him swear an oath to eternal enmity against Rome, an oath Hannibal would fulfill with terrifying precision. The Second Punic War, beginning in 218 BCE, was largely Hannibal's war. He initiated it with an audacious and almost unbelievable feat, leading an army, complete with war elephants, across the Pyrenees and then, astonishingly, over the Alps into Italy. The journey was fraught with peril. Bitter cold, treacherous mountain passes, and hostile Gallic tribes decimated his forces. Yet Hannibal pressed on, a relentless force of nature. His arrival in Italy sent shockwaves through Rome. For the next 15 years, Hannibal would terrorize the Italian peninsula, inflicting a series of humiliating defeats on the Roman legions. The battles of the Second Punic War are legendary. At the Trebia River, Hannibal lured the Romans into a trap, crushing them with a combination of cavalry and hidden infantry. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed the Roman army in a fog-shrouded valley, virtually annihilating it. But it was the Battle of Cannae, fought in 216 BCE, that stands as one of the most brilliant tactical victories. and one of the most devastating defeats in military history. Hannibal, though vastly outnumbered, employed a masterful double envelopment, allowing his center to give way, drawing the Roman legions deeper into his lines, before his cavalry and flanking infantry closed in, trapping and slaughtering tens of thousands of Romans. The scale of the Roman losses was unprecedented, sending the city into a state of panic and despair. Historians still debate the precise reasons why Hannibal, despite his string of victories, never marched on Rome itself after Cannae. Some argue he lacked the siege equipment necessary to take such a well-fortified city. Others suggest he hoped to break Rome's alliances with its Italian neighbours, believing that a direct assault on the capital might only stiffen their resolve. Whatever the reason, his presence in Italy forced Rome to adapt its military strategy. Under the guidance of Quintus Fabius Maximus, who earned the epithet cunctator, or the delayer, Rome adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal's main army, instead harassing his supply lines and engaging in skirmishes. This unpopular but ultimately effective strategy slowly wore down Hannibal's forces, which, cut off from reliable reinforcements and supplies from Carthage, dwindled over time. While Hannibal wreaked havoc in Italy, Rome began to turn the tide elsewhere. A young, brilliant Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, emerged as Hannibal's true nemesis. Scipio, learning from Hannibal's tactics, took the war to Carthaginian territories. He launched a daring campaign in Spain, systematically defeating Carthaginian forces there and cutting off Hannibal's last major source of reinforcements. Then, in a bold stroke, Scipio proposed invading North Africa, striking at the heart of Carthage itself. This forced Hannibal to abandon Italy and return to defend his homeland. The final, decisive confrontation of the Second Punic War took place at Zama in North Africa in 202 BCE. Here, Scipio's legions, bolstered by Numidian cavalry, met Hannibal's weary veterans and newly raised Carthaginian levies. Scipio, anticipating Hannibal's elephant charge, devised a clever tactic, opening lanes in his formations to allow the elephants to pass through harmlessly. The battle was fiercely contested, but ultimately Roman discipline and Scipio's tactical genius prevailed. Hannibal suffered his first and only major defeat. Carthage once again was forced to sue for peace. The terms this time were even more crushing. Carthage lost all its overseas territories. Its navy was reduced to a mere 10 ships, and it was forbidden from waging war without Roman permission. It was effectively reduced to a client state, its power irrevocably broken. The aftermath of the Second Punic War profoundly transformed Roman society. The long years of conflict had taken a terrible toll on the Italian countryside, as Hannibal's army had ravaged agricultural lands. Many small farmers, their lands destroyed or neglected, were forced to sell their holdings, contributing to the growth of large estates, latifundia, worked by slaves. The influx of wealth and slaves from conquered territories also began to create new social tensions and economic disparities. The war had also forged a new sense of Roman identity and resilience. They had faced an existential threat and emerged victorious, solidifying their belief in their own destiny and military superiority. The Mediterranean was now, in essence, a Roman lake. Yet, despite Carthage's utter defeat, a deep-seated fear and resentment lingered in Rome. The elder statesman Cato the Elder, famous for his austere conservatism, concluded every speech, regardless of its topic, with the chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. This relentless advocacy, fueled by lingering paranoia and perhaps a desire to eliminate a potential future rival, eventually led to the Third Punic War. This final conflict, beginning in 149 BCE, was less a war and more a brutal siege. Carthage, despite its diminished status, had slowly begun to recover some of its prosperity, a fact that alarmed Rome. When Carthage, in self-defense, engaged in a minor conflict with Rome's Numidian allies, Rome seized the opportunity. The Roman legions, led by Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, laid siege to Carthage. The city, though weakened, resisted with desperate courage for 3 agonizing years. Its citizens, including women and children, fought on the ramparts, throwing anything they could find at the besiegers. They even melted down statues to forge new weapons. But the outcome was inevitable. In 146 BCE, the Romans finally breached the city walls. What followed was a horrifying spectacle of destruction. The city was systematically sacked, its buildings burned, and its population slaughtered or enslaved. The ancient sources describe the Romans ploughing salt into the earth, where Carthage once stood, ensuring that nothing would ever grow there again, a symbolic act of utter annihilation. While modern archaeological evidence suggests that the salt ploughing might be a dramatic embellishment rather than a literal act, the message was clear. Carthage, once Rome's greatest rival, was utterly erased from the map. The destruction of Carthage served as a brutal testament to Roman power and a grim warning to any who might dare to challenge its supremacy. The fall of Carthage marked a pivotal moment. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. Its influence stretched from the Atlantic to the Aegean, from North Africa to Gaul. This dominance brought immense wealth, but also new challenges. The vast influx of resources and the expansion of the empire put immense strain on Rome's republican institutions. The military, having secured such vast territories, began to play an increasingly powerful role in politics. Generals, returning from victorious campaigns, commanded immense loyalty from their legions and wielded unprecedented personal power. The traditional values of the Republic, once rooted in civic duty and modest living, began to erode under the weight of empire. The Punic Wars, therefore, were not merely a series of military campaigns. They were the crucible in which Rome was forged into a true empire. They transformed its military into an unstoppable force, capable of projecting power across vast distances. They expanded its territorial reach exponentially, bringing diverse peoples and cultures under its sway. But they also sowed the seeds of future internal strife. The vast wealth, the reliance on slave labor, the rise of powerful generals, and the growing disparity between rich and poor would all contribute to the social and political upheavals that would ultimately lead to the decline of the Republic and the rise of the emperors. The Mediterranean, once a contested sea, now lay tranquil under Roman dominion, its waves lapping against shores that for centuries to come would echo with the Latin tongue. But the peace was not without its shadows, for the very forces that had brought Rome to such unparalleled heights would also, in time, begin to pull at the threads of its own intricate tapestry. The world had changed, and Rome, having conquered its greatest rival, now faced the daunting task of governing the vast empire it had so fiercely won. The sun, once a benevolent overseer of Rome's burgeoning strength, began to cast longer, more ominous shadows across the Forum. The Republic, for centuries a testament to civic virtue and shared governance, found itself increasingly strained by the very successes it had cultivated. Victories abroad, while expanding Rome's dominion and filling its coffers, also exacerbated deep-seated inequalities at home, creating a chasm between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses. Land, the bedrock of Roman society and the source of its citizen soldiers, became a flashpoint. As small farmers left their fields to fight Rome's wars, their lands often fell into disrepair or were bought up by powerful senators, who then employed enslaved labor from conquered territories. This created vast estates, or latifundia, which pushed the independent farmer to the brink of destitution, forcing them into the crowded, often squalid streets of Rome, where they swelled the ranks of the urban poor. Into this simmering discontent stepped Tiberius Gracchus, the young idealistic tribune of the plebs, elected in 133 BCE. He belonged to a distinguished family, his mother Cornelia being the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the hero of the Second Punic War. Yet, Tiberius possessed a keen awareness of the plight of the common soldier and farmer. He proposed a radical solution, a land reform bill that would redistribute public land, much of it illegally occupied by the wealthy, back to the landless poor. His intentions, he believed, were to restore the traditional strength of Rome by rebuilding its yeoman farmer class, thereby ensuring a steady supply of citizen soldiers. However, his methods, while perhaps born of desperation, challenged the very foundations of senatorial authority. He bypassed the Senate, taking his bill directly to the plebeian assembly, and when a fellow tribune, Octavius, vetoed his legislation, Tiberius took the unprecedented step of having Octavius deposed by popular vote. This act, though legally questionable, sent shockwaves through the political establishment. It was an assault on the sacred principle of tribunician inviolability and a dangerous precedent for future political maneuvering. The Senate, seeing their power threatened, responded with alarm. They accused Tiberius of seeking tyranny, of aiming to become king, a charge that struck at the very heart of Roman identity and its deep-seated aversion to monarchy. On the day he sought re-election as tribune, a mob, incited by senators and led by his cousin, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Serapio, confronted Tiberius and his supporters on the Capitoline Hill. In the ensuing chaos, Tiberius Gracchus was bludgeoned to death with pieces of furniture, his body, along with those of some 300 of his followers, thrown into the Tiber. This was a watershed moment. It marked the first instance in Roman history where political disputes were settled not by debate and vote, but by widespread bloodshed in the streets of Rome. The Republic had lost its innocence. The taboo against political murder had been irrevocably broken. A decade later, the torch of reform, and indeed the spark of unrest, was reignited by Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus. Elected tribune in 123 BCE, Gaius was perhaps even more ambitious and politically astute than his brother. He understood that to achieve lasting change, he needed a broader base of support. His reforms were sweeping, designed to appeal to various segments of Roman society beyond just the landless poor. He pushed for laws establishing fixed prices for grain, ensuring a steady supply of cheap food for the urban masses. He sought to curb the power of the Senate by transferring control of the juries for extortion cases from senators to the equites, the wealthy equestrian class, thus creating a powerful new alliance. He even proposed granting Roman citizenship to Latin allies and extending Latin rights to other Italian allies, a move aimed at integrating them more fully into the Roman state and securing their loyalty. Gaius's legislative program was a direct challenge to the entrenched interests of the senatorial aristocracy. He was re-elected tribune for a second term, a testament to his popular appeal, but his ambition ultimately mirrored his brother's tragic fate. The Senate, feeling increasingly cornered, resorted to their ultimate weapon, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, or the final decree of the Senate. This extraordinary measure, effectively a declaration of martial law, authorized the consuls to take any action necessary to preserve the Republic, effectively sanctioning the use of force against Roman citizens. In 121 BCE, under the authority of this decree, Gaius Gracchus and his supporters were attacked. He fled across the Tiber to the Aventine Hill, where he was either killed by his own enslaved person at his request or died fighting, along with some 3,000 of his followers. Their bodies, like Tiberius's, were cast into the Tiber. The Gracchi brothers, though ultimately unsuccessful in their reforms, had irrevocably altered the political landscape. They had shown that popular agitation could challenge senatorial authority, and that the Senate, in turn, was willing to resort to extreme violence to protect its power. The seeds of civil war had been sown. The decades following the Gracchi saw a period of intense political instability, marked by growing social unrest and a shift in the nature of military service. Rome's armies, traditionally composed of land-owning citizens, began to dwindle as the number of independent farmers declined. This presented a significant challenge to Rome's expanding empire, which required constant military engagement. It was against this backdrop that Gaius Marius, a man of humble origins from Arpinum, rose to prominence. Unlike the aristocratic Gracchi, Marius was a novus homo, a new man, the first in his family to achieve senatorial rank. His military prowess was undeniable, honed in campaigns in North Africa against King Jugurtha of Numidia. Marius understood the changing demographics of Rome's populace and, more importantly, the changing nature of its military needs. Around 107 BCE, he initiated a revolutionary reform. He opened the legions to all Roman citizens, regardless of their property qualifications. This was a monumental shift. No longer was military service tied to land ownership. Instead, it offered the landless poor a chance for employment, plunder, and ultimately a piece of land upon retirement, promised by their general. This professionalization of the army had profound consequences. Soldiers' loyalty began to shift from the Republic to their individual commanders, who were responsible for their pay, their welfare, and their future. This created powerful personal armies, loyal not to the state, but to the man who led them, a dangerous precedent for the Republic. Marius himself was elected consul an unprecedented 7 times, a testament to his military success and popular support, but also a sign of the Republic's weakening institutions. The stage was now set for a direct clash of ambitions and ideologies, embodied by Marius and his former subordinate, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla, an aristocrat by birth, was initially a protégé of Marius, serving with distinction under him in the Jugurthine War. However, their relationship soured as Sulla's own star began to rise. The flashpoint came with the Social War, 91 to 88 BCE, a brutal conflict between Rome and its Italian allies who had long sought full Roman citizenship. Sulla distinguished himself in this war, further cementing his military reputation. When the Senate appointed Sulla to command the war against King Mithridates VI of Pontus in Asia Minor, Marius, now an aging but still ambitious figure, felt slighted. Through his political allies, Marius managed to have Sulla's command transferred to himself. Sulla, however, was not one to passively accept such a slight. In 88 BCE, in an act of unprecedented audacity, he marched his legions on Rome. This was an unthinkable act, a sacrilege against the very heart of the Republic. Roman armies were not meant to enter the city with hostile intent. Marius and his supporters were forced to flee. Sulla, having secured his command, then departed for the east to fight Mithridates. But no sooner had he left than Marius, along with his ally Lucius Cornelius Cinna, returned to Rome with their own forces. They unleashed a reign of terror, executing Sulla's supporters and consolidating their power. Marius died shortly after, in 86 BCE, having lived long enough to see his political enemies crushed. The stage was now set for Sulla's dramatic return. Having decisively defeated Mithridates, Sulla returned to Italy in 83 BCE, landing at Brundisium. He was met by an army of loyal veterans and a growing number of disaffected aristocrats and young men, including a promising young Pompey, who flocked to his banner. What followed was a brutal civil war that pitted Roman against Roman on a scale never before witnessed. The fighting was fierce and widespread, culminating in the Battle of the Colline Gate in 82 BCE, just outside the walls of Rome, where Sulla's forces decisively defeated the Marian faction. Upon entering Rome, Sulla embarked on a systematic purge of his political enemies, a reign of terror known as the proscriptions. Lists of individuals declared enemies of the state were posted publicly, and anyone could kill them without penalty, seizing their property. Thousands, including many senators and equites, were murdered, their estates confiscated, enriching Sulla and his supporters. This was a calculated act to dismantle the Marian faction and consolidate Sulla's power, but it also instilled a deep sense of fear and suspicion within Roman society. Historians still debate whether Sulla's proscriptions were a necessary evil to restore order, or an act of vengeful tyranny that further eroded the Republic's moral fabric. Regardless, their impact was profound and long-lasting, demonstrating the terrifying potential of military power wielded by an individual. Having eliminated his opposition, Sulla assumed the dictatorship, not for the traditional 6 months in a time of crisis, but indefinitely, for the purpose of writing laws and reorganizing the Republic. He aimed to restore the traditional power of the Senate, which he believed had been undermined by the Gracchi and Marius. He stripped the tribunes of the plebs of much of their power, making it a dead-end office. He increased the size of the Senate, filling its ranks with his own loyalists. He reformed the courts and the electoral system, all with the intention of strengthening the aristocracy and preventing future popular challenges. Yet, in a move that continues to puzzle historians, Sulla voluntarily resigned his dictatorship in 79 BCE, retreating to private life to write his memoirs and enjoy his wealth. Perhaps he truly believed he had restored the Republic to its rightful path, or perhaps he was simply weary of the burdens of power. His retirement and subsequent death in 78 BCE, from what was likely a ruptured ulcer, left a power vacuum and a legacy of both reform and repression. Sulla had, in his own way, attempted to turn back the clock, to rewind the narrative of Roman history to a time before the Gracchi. But his actions, particularly his march on Rome and the proscriptions, had ironically dealt the Republic a more grievous blow than any of the reformers or popular leaders he opposed. He had shown that Rome could be conquered from within, that military might could override civilian authority, and that personal ambition could eclipse devotion to the state. The Republic, though ostensibly restored, was now a fragile vessel, its institutions weakened, its traditions tarnished, and its future increasingly uncertain. The stage was now set for a new generation of ambitious men who had learned the lessons of Marius and Sulla all too well, and who would ultimately complete the transition from republic to empire. The Republic, though vast and seemingly unshakable, had begun to creak under the weight of its own success, its ancient mechanisms struggling to contain the ambitions of truly extraordinary men. The seeds of change, sown in the tumultuous eras of Marius and Sulla, now blossomed into an intricate political dance, a delicate balance of power that would ultimately tip three figures, each possessing immense influence, wealth, and military prowess, began to cast long shadows across the Roman Forum. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, the celebrated general, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, and Gaius Julius Caesar, a rising star of noble lineage but burgeoning debt and boundless ambition. Pompey, the elder of the three, had earned his title Magnus the Great through a series of spectacular military victories, from clearing the Mediterranean of pirates to conquering vast territories in the east, effectively doubling Rome's provincial income. He returned to Rome in 61 BCE, a hero of unparalleled renown, his legions loyal, his coffers overflowing with the spoils of war. Yet, despite his military might, Pompey found himself frustrated by the Senate, which, wary of his immense power, hesitated to ratify his eastern settlements and grant land to his veterans. This bureaucratic resistance, though seemingly minor, would prove a crucial misstep, pushing Pompey into the arms of those who might otherwise have been his rivals. Crassus, meanwhile, wielded a different kind of power. His fortune, amassed through shrewd investments, land speculation, and even, some whispered, by profiting from the fires that often swept through Rome's crowded insulae, made him an indispensable force in Roman politics. He commanded vast networks of clients and debtors, and his influence was felt in every corner of the city's financial life. He had long harboured political ambitions, often in opposition to Pompey, but recognised the need for strategic alliances in the shifting sands of Roman power. And then there was Caesar. Younger than both Pompey and Crassus, Caesar possessed a keen intellect, a captivating charisma, and a relentless drive. Though from an ancient patrician family, his early career was marked by financial struggles and a shrewd understanding of popular sentiment. He had served as aedile, then praetor, charming the Roman populace with extravagant games and public works, all while cultivating a reputation as a champion of the people. He recognized that to truly ascend, he needed more than just popularity. He needed military command, wealth, and the backing of powerful allies. It was in this atmosphere of mutual frustration and ambition that the three men, in 60 BCE, forged a secret alliance, an informal pact that historians would later dub the First Triumvirate. It was not a legal institution, but a pragmatic agreement. Pompey would lend his military prestige and veteran loyalty, Crassus his immense wealth and financial influence, and Caesar his political acumen and popular appeal. Their combined power was immense, a force capable of overriding the Senate and bending the Republic to their will. The immediate goal was to secure their individual agendas. Caesar, elected consul for 59 BCE, became the instrument of their collective power. He promptly pushed through legislation that granted land to Pompey's veterans, ratified Pompey's eastern settlements, and provided financial concessions to Crassus's wealthy equestrian allies. To solidify the alliance, Pompey married Julia, Caesar's only daughter, a union that blended political expediency with genuine affection, at least on Pompey's part. The Republic, it seemed, was now governed not by its ancient institutions, but by the will of three men. Once his consulship ended, Caesar sought the proconsular command that would allow him to build his own military reputation and wealth. He secured the provinces of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum for 5 years, later adding Transalpine Gaul. This appointment, initially seen as a provincial backwater, would become the stage for his legendary military campaigns. For nearly a decade, from 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar embarked on the conquest of Gaul. This vast territory, stretching from the Alps to the Atlantic, was inhabited by numerous Celtic tribes, fierce and independent. Caesar's campaigns were a masterclass in military strategy, engineering, and psychological warfare. He built bridges in days, marched his legions through impossible terrain, and decisively defeated tribal confederations far outnumbering his own forces. The siege of Alesia in 52 BCE stands as a testament to his military genius, where he simultaneously besieged a vast Gallic army led by Vercingetorix and defended against a massive Gallic relief force, ultimately forcing Vercingetorix's surrender. The Gallic wars were brutal, yet immensely successful. They brought immense wealth to Rome, expanded its territories, and, crucially, forged Caesar's legions into an unshakable fighting force, utterly loyal to him. The sheer scale of the conquest was astonishing. Caesar claimed to have captured over 1 million Gauls and killed another 1 million. While these numbers are likely exaggerated for propaganda purposes, the impact was undeniable. He had not only secured Rome's northern frontier, but had also elevated himself to a military hero on par with, or even surpassing, Pompey. Back in Rome, however, the Triumvirate began to fray. In 56 BCE, the three men met in Lucca, a town just south of Caesar's province, to renew their pact. Caesar secured an extension of his Gallic command for another 5 years, while Pompey and Crassus were promised new consulships for 55 BCE, followed by lucrative proconsular commands. Crassus chose Syria, hoping to gain military glory and wealth by campaigning against the Parthian Empire, Rome's formidable eastern rival. Pompey opted for Spain, though he chose to govern his provinces through legates, remaining in Rome to maintain his political influence. This renewal, however, was merely a temporary reprieve. The bonds of the Triumvirate were weakening. The death of Julia in 54 BCE, followed by the tragic death of her infant child, severed the personal link between Caesar and Pompey. Then, in 53 BCE, disaster struck Crassus. His Parthian campaign ended in utter catastrophe at the Battle of Carrhae, where his legions were annihilated and Crassus himself was killed. His death removed the crucial balancing force between Caesar and Pompey, leaving the two most powerful men in Rome in direct opposition. With Crassus gone, the political landscape became a two-man struggle for supremacy. Pompey increasingly aligned with the conservative senatorial faction, who viewed Caesar's growing power with alarm, gradually distanced himself from his former ally. The Senate, desperate to curb Caesar's influence, sought to strip him of his command and legions, forcing him to return to Rome as a private citizen, vulnerable to prosecution for alleged irregularities during his consulship. Caesar, however, understood the stakes. To return without his legions meant political ruin, possibly even death. He demanded the right to stand for consul in absentia, a privilege that would allow him to retain his command until the election. The Senate, egged on by Pompey, refused. The constitutional crisis deepened. On January 10, 49 BCE, Caesar stood at the Rubicon, a small river that marked the boundary between Cisalpine Gaul and Italy. Roman law forbade a general from leading his army across this river into Italy proper. To cross it with his legions would be an act of war, an open challenge to the Republic. He hesitated, contemplating the enormity of the decision. The phrase alea acta est, the die is cast, is attributed to him at this pivotal moment, though historians still debate whether he truly uttered these precise words or if it was a later embellishment. Regardless, the meaning was clear. There was no turning back. He led his 13th Legion across the Rubicon. The crossing of the Rubicon plunged Rome into civil war. Pompey, caught off guard by Caesar's swift advance and lacking sufficient forces in Italy, retreated south with the Senate, eventually sailing to Greece to gather a larger army. Caesar, after securing Italy, pursued Pompey across the Adriatic. The decisive confrontation came at Pharsalus in Greece in 48 BCE. Despite Pompey having a larger army, Caesar's disciplined veterans, hardened by years of Gallic warfare, achieved a stunning victory. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was tragically assassinated by agents of the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who hoped to curry favor with Caesar. Caesar, arriving in Egypt, was reportedly saddened by Pompey's death, seeing it as a tragic end for a once great rival. He quickly became entangled in Egyptian politics, famously aligning himself with Cleopatra VII against her brother. After securing his position in Egypt, Caesar spent the next few years stamping out the last vestiges of senatorial resistance across the Roman world, from Asia Minor to North Africa and Spain. His victory at Thapsus in 46 BCE against Cato the Younger and other Pompeian loyalists, and Munda in 45 BCE against Pompey's sons, solidified his absolute control. Returning to Rome, Caesar was now the undisputed master of the Roman world. He was granted an unprecedented series of honors and titles: dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life, consul, censor, and pontifex maximus. He initiated a vast program of reforms, including the reorganization of the calendar, the Julian calendar, which forms the basis of our modern calendar, land distribution for veterans, debt relief, and ambitious public works projects. He expanded the Senate, bringing in new members from Italy and the provinces, further diluting the power of the old Roman aristocracy. He was, in all but name, a monarch. Yet his accumulation of power, his disregard for traditional republican institutions, and his seemingly endless string of honors bred resentment among a faction of senators who clung to the ideals of the Republic. They saw him not as a benevolent leader, but as a tyrant, a destroyer of liberty. The very idea of a king in Rome was anathema. a ghost of the despised monarchy that had been overthrown centuries earlier. A conspiracy began to form, led by Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus, a man whom Caesar had favoured and considered almost like a son. The conspirators, numbering around 60, believed that by eliminating Caesar, they would restore the Republic and prevent Rome from falling under the sway of a single ruler. The details of their planning are somewhat murky, but their resolve was firm. On the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE, Caesar arrived at the theatre of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting. Despite omens and warnings, he proceeded, perhaps out of a sense of destiny, or perhaps a belief in his own invincibility. As he sat in his chair, the conspirators surrounded him. One by one, they struck. The first blow, often attributed to Casca, was followed by many others. Caesar, reportedly, initially resisted, but upon seeing Brutus among his attackers, he uttered his famous last words, "Et tu, Brute," you too, Brutus, though this too is likely a later literary embellishment by Shakespeare. He collapsed at the foot of a statue of Pompey, his former rival, pierced by 23 dagger wounds. The assassination of Julius Caesar did not, as the conspirators hoped, restore the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into another period of civil war, far more protracted and bloody than the last. The conspirators, misjudging the public's reaction and Caesar's enduring popularity, found themselves without a clear plan for the aftermath. Caesar's loyal lieutenants, particularly Mark Antony and his adopted heir, Octavian, would soon rise to avenge his death, setting the stage for the final, irreversible transformation of the Roman Republic into an empire. The dream of a free republic, for all its imperfections, had died with Caesar, leaving behind a power vacuum that only a new form of governance could fill. The air in Rome, thick with the dust of mourning and the scent of blood, seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination. The Ides of March, 44 BCE, had not brought liberation, as some conspirators had hoped, but rather a chilling vacuum, a void that threatened to swallow the Republic whole. The assassins, led by Brutus and Cassius, had struck down the dictator, believing they were restoring liberty. But they had merely unleashed a torrent of unpredictable forces. The Roman populace, initially stunned, soon turned against them, swayed by the powerful oratory of Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and consul. Antony, with Caesar's blood-stained toga held aloft, delivered a eulogy that masterfully ignited public fury, transforming the slain dictator from a tyrant into a martyred hero. The conspirators, finding themselves pariahs, fled Rome, seeking refuge in the eastern provinces. This sudden power vacuum opened the door for new contenders, none more significant than Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted son and heir. A mere 18-year-old, frail in health, but possessing an uncanny political acumen, Octavius arrived in Rome from Apollonia, where he had been studying. His inheritance was not just vast wealth, but the formidable name of Caesar, a name that resonated deeply with the legions and the common people. He quickly understood that the path to power lay in embracing this legacy, despite the initial skepticism of many, including Cicero, who initially saw him as a malleable youth. Cicero, the great orator and staunch defender of the Republic, championed Octavius as a bulwark against Antony, whom he perceived as the greater threat to republican ideals. He even delivered a series of scathing speeches, the Philippics, against Antony, echoing Demosthenes' orations against Philip of Macedon. However, the political landscape was far too volatile for such simple alliances. Antony, still powerful and commanding legions, refused to cede his authority. The Republic, already teetering, found itself caught between the ambitions of these two men. In 43 BCE, a surprising and pragmatic alliance was forged, born not of friendship, but of necessity. Octavian, Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Another prominent Caesarian general met on an island near Bononia, modern Bologna. This clandestine meeting resulted in the formation of the Second Triumvirate, a legally sanctioned dictatorship aimed at restoring order and punishing Caesar's assassins. Unlike the First Triumvirate, which was an informal political understanding, this was a formal body, granted immense power by the Lex Titia, a law passed by the Roman Assembly. The first act of this new triumvirate was chillingly effective. A series of proscriptions, a brutal purge of their political enemies. Lists of condemned citizens were posted publicly, and their property was confiscated, their lives forfeit. Thousands perished, including the eloquent Cicero, whose head and hands were famously displayed in the Roman Forum, a grim testament to the end of an era of republican debate. This act, though horrific, solidified the Triumvirate's control over Rome and its resources, providing the funds and stability needed to pursue their primary objective: vengeance against Brutus and Cassius. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation in the east. In 42 BCE, the armies of the Second Triumvirate met the forces of Brutus and Cassius at Philippi in Macedon. The battle was fought in two phases. In the first engagement, Octavian's wing was initially routed by Brutus, while Antony decisively defeated Cassius, who, believing Brutus had also lost, tragically took his own life. A few weeks later, the remaining forces clashed again. This time, Antony's strategic brilliance shone, leading to a decisive victory for the Triumvirs. Brutus, seeing all hope lost, also committed suicide, falling on his own sword. With the deaths of Caesar's principal assassins, the Triumvirs had achieved their immediate goal, but their victory also removed the last vestiges of republican resistance, leaving the path clear for their own internal power struggles. Following Philippi, the Triumvirs divided the vast Roman world amongst themselves. Antony took control of the wealthy eastern provinces, a region rich in resources and steeped in ancient cultures. Lepidus was largely marginalized, eventually relegated to Africa, and later stripped of his military power. Though he retained the title of Pontifex Maximus until his death, Octavian, ever the astute politician, returned to Italy, facing the monumental task of settling tens of thousands of demobilized veterans, a challenge that nearly plunged Rome into another civil war, known as the Perusian War, 41 to 40 BCE, against Antony's brother Lucius Antonius and his wife Fulvia. Octavian, though young, demonstrated a ruthless efficiency in dealing with this crisis, further consolidating his power in the heart of the Roman world. The uneasy peace between Octavian and Antony was maintained for a time through diplomatic efforts and even a marriage. In 40 BCE, Antony married Octavia, Octavian's sister, a union intended to solidify their alliance. For several years, Antony focused on affairs in the East, particularly his campaigns against the Parthian Empire, Rome's perennial rival. It was during this period that his relationship with Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, deepened and became increasingly public. Cleopatra, a woman of extraordinary intellect, charisma, and political ambition, had already captivated Caesar, and now she drew Antony into her orbit. Their liaison was not merely romantic, it was a powerful political alliance, leveraging Egypt's immense wealth and strategic location. However, the bond between Antony and Octavian began to fray. Stretched thin by distance, differing ambitions, and the relentless whispers of propaganda, Octavian, back in Rome, meticulously cultivated his image as the savior of the Republic, the restorer of peace and traditional Roman values. He portrayed Antony as an orientalized despot, corrupted by the luxuries and customs of the East, abandoning his Roman identity for the allure of a foreign queen. Antony's increasingly public relationship with Cleopatra, his lavish lifestyle in Alexandria, and his distribution of Roman territories to their children, known as the Donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE, were all used by Octavian to paint him as a threat to Roman integrity and a betrayer of Roman traditions. The scholarly debate surrounding Antony's true intentions during this period is complex. Some historians argue that Antony genuinely sought to establish a new Eastern capital for the Roman Empire, perhaps even a dual monarchy with Cleopatra, reflecting a Hellenistic vision of empire. Others contend that he was simply deeply enamored with Cleopatra and made poor political choices under her influence. Still others suggest that his actions were pragmatic attempts to secure resources for his Parthian campaigns and solidify his power base in the East, much as Caesar had done. Regardless of his motivations, his actions provided Octavian with the perfect pretext for war. The inevitable clash came to a head in 31 BCE. Octavian, having skillfully manipulated Roman public opinion and secured the support of the Senate, declared war not directly on Antony but on Cleopatra, framing it as a defense of Roman honor against a foreign aggressor. The decisive naval battle took place off the coast of Actium, Greece. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a large fleet, but their strategy was flawed. During the battle, Cleopatra's ships, perhaps sensing defeat or executing a prearranged plan, broke formation and sailed away, followed by Antony's flagship. This sudden retreat demoralized Antony's forces, leading to a crushing defeat for their remaining fleet. The Battle of Actium was a turning point, marking the end of Antony's challenge to Octavian's supremacy. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, their hopes shattered. Octavian pursued them relentlessly. In 30 BCE, his forces entered Egypt. Antony, receiving false news of Cleopatra's death, fell on his sword. Cleopatra, captured by Octavian, attempted to charm him, perhaps hoping to preserve her kingdom, or at least her children's inheritance. When it became clear that Octavian intended to parade her as a captive in his triumph in Rome, she chose to die by suicide, famously using an asp, a symbol of royalty in Egypt, to bite her. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries since the time of Alexander the Great, came to an end. Egypt became a Roman province, directly administered by Octavian, a vast granary that would feed Rome for centuries. With Antony and Cleopatra gone, and Lepidus long since neutralized, Octavian stood alone as the undisputed master of the Roman world. He had achieved what Caesar had not, complete and unchallenged power, but he understood the lessons of Caesar's fate. He could not simply declare himself dictator or king. The Roman people, though weary of civil war, still clung to the ideals, if not the reality, of the Republic. His genius lay in his ability to dismantle the Republic while appearing to restore it. Over the next few years, Octavian meticulously crafted a new political order. He returned to Rome in 29 BCE, celebrated with a magnificent triple triumph. He began a slow, deliberate process of institutional reform, carefully consolidating his power behind a facade of republican tradition. He held various magistracies, including consul, but gradually relinquished some of these, famously restoring the Republic to the Senate and the Roman people in 27 BCE. In return, the Senate bestowed upon him the honorific title of Augustus, meaning revered one or majestic, a name that carried a sense of divine authority. He also received the title of Princeps Civitatis, first citizen, a humble-sounding title that masked his supreme authority. This new system, often referred to as the Principate, was a delicate balance. Augustus maintained the outward forms of the Republic, the Senate, the assemblies, the magistracies, but he held all the true power. He commanded the legions, controlled the provinces, and held ultimate financial authority. He was careful to avoid the title of king or dictator, instead accumulating a series of powers that in combination made him an emperor in all but name. He held Imperium Proconsulare Maius, giving him authority over all other proconsuls and the armies, and Tribunicia Potestas, the power of a tribune, which made his person sacrosanct and allowed him to veto any legislation. The reign of Augustus ushered in the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity that lasted for over 2 centuries. After decades of civil war, the Roman world yearned for peace, and Augustus delivered it. He reformed the army, establishing a professional standing army loyal to him. He undertook massive building projects in Rome, famously boasting that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He patronized the arts, and his reign saw the flourishing of Roman literature, with poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid creating timeless works that celebrated Roman identity and the new Augustan age. Yet beneath the veneer of restored republicanism, the truth was clear. The Roman Republic was dead. It had died not with Caesar's assassination, but slowly over decades of civil strife, ambition, and the erosion of its institutions. The rise of Augustus marked the definitive end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. The transition was subtle, almost imperceptible to many at the time, like the slow shifting of tectonic plates, creating a new landscape without a sudden cataclysmic break. Perhaps the Roman people, weary of the constant bloodshed and political instability that had plagued the late Republic. A public were willing to trade some measure of liberty for the promise of peace and order. And so the sun set on the Republic, and a new dawn, under the benevolent but absolute rule of Augustus, began to illuminate the vast Roman world. The echoes of senatorial debates and popular assemblies faded, replaced by the quiet hum of an empire, stretching its vast limbs across 3 continents, all under the guiding hand of its first emperor. The whispers of the Republic, once so vibrant with the clamour of senators and the marching of legions, began to fade into a new, more profound silence. Octavian, now known as Augustus, had meticulously woven a tapestry of power, presenting himself not as a king, but as the Princeps, the first citizen, the restorer of the Republic. Yet, beneath this carefully crafted facade, lay the foundations of an empire, an era that would come to be known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This was not a peace born of universal harmony, but rather of overwhelming military might and sophisticated administration. A peace enforced by the legions and maintained by a singular, unchallengeable authority. Augustus, with a keen understanding of both human nature and the volatile history of Rome, embarked on a monumental task of reconstruction and consolidation. He understood that stability required not just military dominance, but also public buy-in, a sense of shared purpose and prosperity. He initiated vast public works programs, repairing roads, aqueducts, and temples that had fallen into disrepair during the civil wars. The city of Rome, once a sprawling, somewhat chaotic metropolis, began to transform under his vision. He famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. And indeed, the architectural grandeur of his reign was undeniable. The Forum of Augustus, with its towering temple of Mars altar, stood as a testament to his piety and his desire to link his rule to divine favor and military success. Beyond the physical transformation, Augustus implemented sweeping administrative reforms. He established the Praetorian Guard, an elite military unit ostensibly for the protection of the emperor, but in reality, a powerful political force that would, in later centuries, play a decisive role in the succession of emperors. He reformed the provincial administration, sending out trusted governors and ensuring that tax collection was more equitable and less exploitative, thereby reducing the likelihood of revolts and fostering a sense of imperial unity. He also formalized the imperial cult, encouraging the worship of the emperor and his family as divine figures, a shrewd move that further solidified his authority and provided a unifying religious framework across the vast empire. The Pax Romana, which largely endured for over 2 centuries, from Augustus's reign, 27 BCE, to the death of Marcus Aurelius, 180 CE, was characterized by unprecedented economic growth and cultural flourishing. Trade routes, protected by Roman legions, stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Goods flowed freely. Grain from Egypt, olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, silk from China, though indirectly, and spices from India. This vast network of commerce not only enriched the empire, but also fostered a degree of cultural exchange, with Roman ideas, laws, and Latin language spreading far and wide. The sheer scale of Roman engineering, from the intricate network of roads that crisscrossed the empire to the impressive aqueducts that supplied cities with fresh water, facilitated this interconnectedness. Imagine the rhythmic clang of hammers and chisels, the shouts of laborers, as these monumental structures slowly rose from the earth, threads in the intricate fabric of empire. Yet this era of peace was not without its shadows. The transition of power, a constant source of anxiety in any monarchy, remained a delicate dance. Augustus, despite his long and largely successful reign, struggled with the question of succession. His chosen heirs often died prematurely, leading to a complex and sometimes tragic series of adoptions and marriages. When he finally passed away in 14 CE, after ruling for over 40 years, the mantle of power fell to his stepson, Tiberius. Tiberius, the seasoned general and administrator, inherited an empire at its zenith. He was a capable, if somewhat reclusive, ruler. Unlike Augustus, who revelled in public appearance, and grand gestures, Tiberius preferred to govern from behind the scenes, eventually retreating to the island of Capri. This detachment, coupled with his increasingly suspicious nature, led to a period of political intrigue and purges within the Roman elite. The Praetorian Guard under the ambitious Sejanus gained undue influence, and many prominent Romans fell victim to accusations of treason. Historians still debate the true extent of Tiberius's cruelty versus the machinations of those around him. But the perception of a dark, brooding emperor certainly took root. After Tiberius's death in 37 CE, the empire saw the brief, tumultuous reign of Gaius, better known as Caligula. His rule, lasting only 4 years, is often depicted as a descent into madness and tyranny. Stories abound of his extravagant spending, his proclaimed divinity, his cruel whims, and his infamous horse, Incitatus, whom he allegedly intended to appoint to the consulship. While some of these tales may be exaggerated by later historians eager to demonize a perceived tyrant, there's little doubt that Caligula's unpredictable behavior created immense instability and fear within the Roman court. His assassination by members of the Praetorian Guard in 41 CE marked a dangerous precedent. The military, not the Senate, had the power to decide the fate of Rome's leaders, was now openly deciding who would rule. In the chaos that followed Caligula's death, the Praetorian Guard famously found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain, trembling with fear. Despite his physical infirmities and scholarly demeanor, Claudius proved to be a surprisingly effective emperor. He was a meticulous administrator, expanding the imperial bureaucracy and creating new departments to manage the vast affairs of the empire. He also oversaw the successful Roman conquest of Britain in 43 CE, a significant expansion of the empire's borders. Claudius was a keen historian himself, writing extensively on Etruscan history, a detail often overlooked in the more dramatic accounts of his reign. His personal life, however, was fraught with intrigue, particularly concerning his ambitious wives, Messalina and Agrippina the Younger, both of whom exerted considerable influence and were eventually implicated in plots against him. Claudius's death in 54 CE, widely believed to have been at the hands of Agrippina, paved the way for her son, Nero, to ascend to the throne. Nero's early reign, guided by his mother, the philosopher Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, was initially promising. He reduced taxes, banned gladiatorial games for a time, then showed an interest in the arts. However, as he matured, his tyrannical tendencies emerged. He famously ordered the murder of his own mother, Agrippina, and later his wife, Octavia. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, which devastated much of the city, became a pivotal moment. While Nero initiated ambitious rebuilding programs and provided relief to the populace, rumors persisted that he had started the fire himself, or at least fiddled while Rome burned, though the fiddle, as we know it, did not exist then. He used the fire as a pretext to persecute Christians, a relatively new and misunderstood sect, making them scapegoats for public anger. His increasingly erratic behavior, his obsession with music and performance, and his brutal suppression of dissent led to widespread discontent. A series of revolts culminated in his suicide in 68 CE, uttering the poignant words, "Qualis artifex pereo," "What an artist dies in me." Nero's death plunged Rome into the year of the four emperors, 69 CE, a brief but intense period of civil war that shattered the illusion of stability established by Augustus. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius each held the imperial title for a short, violent time, their reigns marked by military coups and bloody battles. This tumultuous interlude highlighted the fragility of the imperial system when the succession was not clear and the legions held too much power. From the chaos emerged Vespasian, a seasoned general who had been campaigning in Judea. He was a man of humble origins, a stark contrast to the aristocratic Julio-Claudians, and his rise signaled a shift in the imperial dynamic. Vespasian, the founder of the Flavian dynasty, brought much-needed stability back to the empire. He was a pragmatic and frugal ruler, focused on restoring Rome's finances and public morale. He famously imposed a tax on public urinals, leading to the adage, pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell. His most enduring legacy, however, is the construction of the Flavian amphitheatre, better known as the Colosseum. This massive arena, built on the site of Nero's extravagant Golden House, was a deliberate act of public relations, returning land to the people and providing entertainment on an unprecedented scale. Imagine the roar of the crowd, the glint of sun on polished armor, the scent of dust and sweat as gladiators fought beneath the vast open sky. Vespasian's reign, 69 to 79 CE, was followed by that of his elder son, Titus. Titus, who had commanded the legions during the siege and destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, was a popular emperor, known for his generosity and mild temperament. His brief reign, 79 to 81 CE, was marked by two major disasters: the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum in 79 CE, and a devastating fire in Rome in 80 CE. Titus responded with compassion and efficiency, providing aid to the victims and personally overseeing relief efforts. His early death was widely mourned. The last of the Flavian emperors was Domitian, Titus's younger brother. Domitian's reign, 81 to 96 CE, was characterized by a return to a more autocratic style of rule, reminiscent of Tiberius or Nero. He was an efficient administrator and a capable military leader, strengthening the empire's borders and maintaining financial stability. He completed many of the public works initiated by his father and brother, including the Colosseum. However, he was also deeply suspicious, increasingly paranoid, and prone to cruelty. He demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, further alienating the Senate. His reign ended, like Caligula's and Nero's, in assassination, orchestrated by members of his own court and even his wife. This cycle of imperial violence, despite the overarching peace, highlighted the inherent dangers of unchecked power and the constant struggle for control within the Roman elite. The Pax Romana, though often associated with the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties, was a complex period, not a monolithic block of tranquility. It was a time of immense growth, architectural marvels, and administrative sophistication. Yet it was also punctuated by political intrigue, violent successions, and the ever-present threat of imperial tyranny. The empire under these early emperors solidified its institutions, expanded its reach, and laid the groundwork for centuries of Roman dominance. The echoes of their decisions, their triumphs, and their follies would resonate through the ages, shaping the destiny of a civilization that, for a time, truly ruled the world. The vast network of roads, the soaring aqueducts, the enduring legal principles, these were the tangible legacies of an era where, despite the occasional storm, the Roman eagle soared highest, casting its long shadow across the known world. The Golden Age, often looked back upon with a wistful sigh, truly began to blossom under Nerva. Though his reign was brief, a mere 16 months from 96 to 98 CE. He was an elderly senator, chosen by the Senate after the assassination of Domitian, and his greatest legacy was not in grand conquests or sweeping reforms, but in a singular, profound act of adoption. He broke the dynastic cycle, the often bloody succession of father to son, and instead chose the most capable man he could find, Marcus Ulpius Traianus, known to history as Trajan. This act, born of necessity and wisdom, ushered in a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity, a time when the vast Roman Empire seemed to breathe easily, its borders secure, its cities thriving. Trajan, a seasoned general from Hispania, was a man of action and immense ambition. His reign, from 98 to 117 CE, saw the empire reach its greatest territorial extent. Imagine the legions, their standards glinting under the Dacian sun, marching through dense forests and over rugged mountains. Trajan's campaigns against Dacia, a kingdom rich in gold and fiercely independent, were epic in scale. The conquest of Dacia, completed by 106 CE, brought immense wealth into the Roman treasury, funding ambitious public works projects that transformed the capital and beyond. Trajan's Forum in Rome, with its towering column depicting the Dacian wars in intricate detail, remains a testament to his military prowess and his desire to leave an enduring mark. Yet his ambitions stretched further east. He pushed the empire's boundaries into Parthia, reaching the Persian Gulf, a feat no emperor before or since would accomplish. Perhaps he dreamed of emulating Alexander, or perhaps it was simply the natural impulse of a victorious general to seek new horizons. But the vastness of these conquests, particularly in the east, stretched Roman resources thin, hinting at the immense challenges of governing such a sprawling dominion. After Trajan, Hadrian, his adopted successor, reigned from 117 to 138 CE. Hadrian was a different kind of emperor, a man of intellect, art, and introspection. He recognized the overextension of the empire and famously consolidated its borders, even abandoning some of Trajan's eastern conquests. His vision was not one of endless expansion, but of internal strength and cultural cohesion. He traveled extensively throughout the empire, a restless spirit seeking to understand the diverse peoples under his rule. He commissioned the construction of the Pantheon, a marvel of engineering and architectural beauty, its oculus open to the heavens, a silent tribute to the gods and the ingenuity of human hands. He also ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall across northern Britannia, a formidable barrier against the Picts, a tangible symbol of the empire's defensive posture. This wall, stretching from coast to coast, was not merely a military fortification. It was a psychological boundary, a declaration that Rome had found its limits and would now focus on nurturing what it held. There's a quiet debate among historians as to whether Hadrian's consolidation was a sign of weakness or a profound act of strategic wisdom. Did he foresee the unsustainable nature of endless growth, or was he simply less ambitious than his predecessor? The war itself whispers no answers, only the constant wind sweeping over its ancient stones. Antoninus Pius, ruling from 138 to 161 CE followed Hadrian. His reign is often characterized as a period of profound peace and stability. So much so that historical records from this era are less dramatic, less filled with grand campaigns or political intrigue. He was a mild-mannered, deeply respected senator, chosen by Hadrian for his administrative skill and his unwavering commitment to justice. He rarely left Italy, preferring to govern from Rome, focusing on legal reforms and the welfare of his subjects. The empire, under his gentle hand, seemed to hum with contentment. Taxes were fair, infrastructure was maintained, and the arts flourished. It was a time when the average Roman citizen might have felt truly secure, a rare luxury in the annals of history. He even built another wall, the Antonine Wall, further north in Scotland, though it was eventually abandoned, proving perhaps that even in times of peace, the desire for a slightly larger buffer could not be resisted. The last of the 5 good emperors was Marcus Aurelius, who reigned from 161 to 180 CE. His rule is often seen as the twilight of this golden age, a period of philosophical introspection juxtaposed with escalating external pressures. Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic philosopher, known for his Meditations, a collection of personal reflections that offer a profound glimpse into the mind of a ruler grappling with the burdens of power and the fleeting nature of existence. He was a man who preferred contemplation to conflict, yet his reign was plagued by incessant warfare. The Marcomannic Wars, a series of protracted conflicts along the Danube frontier, were particularly brutal, forcing Marcus Aurelius to spend much of his time on campaign, far from the intellectual pursuits he cherished. A devastating plague, possibly smallpox, known as the Antonine Plague, swept across the empire during his rule, decimating populations and straining resources. This plague, arriving around 165 CE, is believed to have killed millions, perhaps 5 to 10% of the empire's population, profoundly weakening its military and economic foundations. It was a stark reminder that even the most powerful empire was vulnerable to the unseen forces of nature. Historians still debate the precise impact of the Antonine Plague. Was it the primary catalyst for the decline that followed, or merely an accelerant to pre-existing vulnerabilities? The silence of the ancient texts offers no definitive answer, only the chilling echoes of a widespread illness. With Marcus Aurelius's death in 180 CE, the era of the adopted emperors ended. He chose his biological son, Commodus, as his successor, breaking with the tradition that had served Rome so well. Commodus, who ruled from 180 to 192 CE, was a stark contrast to his thoughtful father. He was vain, megalomaniacal, and obsessed with gladiatorial combat, often participating in the arena himself, much to the dismay of the Roman elite. His reign was marked by corruption, extravagance, and a growing disconnect between the emperor and the realities of governing. He saw himself as Hercules reborn, a demigod rather than a statesman, and his erratic behavior plunged Rome into a period of instability. His assassination in 192 CE, orchestrated by his own advisors, plunged the empire into a brief but brutal civil war, known as the Year of the 5 Emperors. This chaotic interlude marked a decisive turning point, a clear signal that the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was beginning to fray. The victor of this civil war was Septimius Severus, who founded the Severan dynasty, ruling from 193 to 211 CE. Severus, a North African general, understood that the army was now the true source of power. He famously advised his sons, enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men. His reign saw a significant increase in military spending and the elevation of soldiers' status, a necessary measure to maintain control in a volatile empire, but one that further strained the imperial treasury. He fought successful campaigns against Parthia and strengthened the empire's frontiers. But his focus on military might came at the expense of civilian administration and economic stability. The Severan emperors who followed, Caracalla, Geta, Elagabalus, and Severus Alexander, were a mixed bag of ruthless tyrants and well-meaning but ultimately ineffective rulers. Caracalla, known for his monumental baths in Rome, famously granted Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire in 212 CE. Ostensibly a generous act, it was largely a means to broaden the tax base, and increase military recruitment, further blurring the lines between Roman and provincial. This act, while seemingly minor at the time, had profound long-term implications for Roman identity and governance. The assassination of Severus Alexander in 235 CE marked the beginning of what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of unparalleled chaos and near collapse that lasted for 50 years, until 284 CE. Imagine a world where the very ground beneath your feet felt unstable, where the emperor changed hands with dizzying frequency, often through violent means. During this half-century, there were at least 26 legitimate emperors, and many more usurpers who claimed the throne, averaging one emperor every 2 years. Most met violent ends, assassinated by their own soldiers or rivals. The Roman Empire, once a beacon of order and stability, descended into a maelstrom of civil wars. Legions, once united against external foes, now battled each other for control of the vast empire. This political instability was compounded by a severe economic crisis. The constant warfare drained the imperial treasury. Emperors, desperate to pay their ever-demanding soldiers, resorted to debasing the coinage, reducing the silver content of denarii until they were practically worthless. This rampant inflation crippled trade, led to widespread poverty, and shattered public trust in the government. Imagine merchants refusing to accept the official currency, preferring to barter goods or demand payment in precious metals. The intricate network of trade routes that had sustained the empire for centuries began to unravel. Cities, once vibrant centers of commerce, saw their populations dwindle as people fled to the countryside, seeking sustenance and safety. External threats, which had been relatively contained during the Pax Romana, now surged with renewed vigor. Along the Rhine and Danube frontiers, Germanic tribes, the Goths, Alemanni, and Franks, launched increasingly devastating raids into Roman territory, exploiting the empire's internal strife. In the east, the Sasanian Empire, a new and aggressive Persian power, emerged as a formidable adversary, replacing the Parthians and posing a serious threat to Rome's wealthy eastern provinces. Emperor Valerian, ruling from 253 to 260 CE, suffered the ultimate humiliation. He was captured by the Sasanian king Shapur I in 260 CE, becoming the only Roman emperor to be taken prisoner. He died in captivity, a devastating blow to Roman prestige and morale. The empire fragmented. In the west, a series of breakaway states emerged, including the Gallic Empire, which encompassed Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania, and the Palmyrene Empire in the east, led by the formidable Queen Zenobia, who challenged Roman authority over Syria, Egypt, and parts of Asia Minor. These empires within an empire demonstrated the complete breakdown of central authority. For a time, it seemed as if the vast Roman dominion would simply splinter into myriad independent kingdoms. The very idea of a unified Rome seemed to be fading, a distant memory from a more stable past. The crisis also manifested in social and cultural upheaval. The constant fear of invasion, the economic hardship, and the rapid turnover of emperors fostered a sense of profound insecurity and disillusionment. Public confidence in the traditional Roman gods and institutions waned. New religious movements, particularly Christianity, began to gain traction, offering a sense of hope and community in a world that felt increasingly bleak. The once clear social hierarchy blurred as powerful military commanders rose from humble origins, and wealthy landowners fortified their estates, becoming self-sufficient enclaves, effectively creating localized power centers. The reasons for this profound crisis are multifaceted and still debated by scholars. Was it the sheer size of the empire, making it inherently ungovernable? Was it the breakdown of the traditional succession system? Was it economic mismanagement? Or perhaps the relentless pressure from barbarian tribes? Or was it a combination of all these factors, a perfect storm that threatened to extinguish the Roman light forever? The truth, as often happens in history, is likely a complex tapestry woven from many threads. The empire, once seemingly invincible, was on the brink, its very existence hanging by a thread, waiting for a strong hand to pull it back from the precipice. The echoes of marching boots and desperate pleas for stability filled the air, a stark contrast to the serene peace of the Antonine Age. The empire, vast and sprawling, found itself teetering on the brink, its internal wounds festering, its external threats multiplying. The 3rd century had been a crucible of chaos, a period known to history as the crisis of the 3rd century, where emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, often at the whim of their legions. It was into this fractured landscape that a man named Diocletian stepped, a military commander from humble origins in Dalmatia, who seized power in 284 CE. He was a pragmatist, a visionary, who understood that the empire, in its current form, was simply too large and too unwieldy for one man to govern effectively. Diocletian's solution was audacious, the tetrarchy, or rule by 4. He divided the empire into 2 halves, east and west, each governed by an Augustus, a senior emperor. Below each Augustus was a Caesar, a junior emperor and designated successor. This ingenious system was designed to ensure smoother transitions of power and to allow for more localized, efficient administration and defense. Diocletian himself took the east with his capital at Nicomedia, closer to the persistent threats from Persia. Maximian, his trusted colleague, governed the west from Milan, strategically positioned to respond to barbarian incursions along the Rhine and Danube. The Caesars, Constantius Chlorus in the west and Galerius in the east, were given their own spheres of influence, further decentralizing authority. Diocletian's reforms extended far beyond mere administrative restructuring. He understood that the economy was in disarray, plagued by rampant inflation and a chaotic monetary system. He attempted to stabilize the currency, though his efforts were often met with limited success. Perhaps his most ambitious and ultimately controversial economic reform was the Edict on Maximum Prices, issued in 301 CE. This decree attempted to control inflation by setting fixed prices for thousands of goods and services, from grain and wine to skilled labor. While well-intentioned, it proved largely unenforceable and led to black markets and shortages, a testament to the complexities of economic control in such a vast and diverse empire. Beyond economics, Diocletian sought to restore a sense of order and traditional Roman values. He reorganized the provincial administration, creating smaller, more manageable provinces and grouping them into larger dioceses, each overseen by a vicar. This hierarchical structure was designed to improve governmental efficiency and tax collection. He also strengthened the military, increasing the size of the army and reorganizing its command structure, creating both frontier garrisons and mobile field armies capable of rapid deployment. However, Diocletian's reign is also remembered for its darker chapters, particularly his persecution of Christians. While earlier emperors had sporadically persecuted Christians, Diocletian's Great Persecution, beginning in 303 CE, was the most widespread and systematic. Driven by a desire to restore traditional Roman polytheism and unify the empire under its ancient gods, he issued a series of edicts ordering the destruction of Christian churches, the burning of scriptures, and the arrest and torture of clergy and ordinary believers who refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods. Thousands suffered martyrdom, and the persecution left an indelible scar on the nascent Christian community. Historians still debate the precise motivations behind Diocletian's intense persecution. Was it a genuine fear of a subversive cult undermining Roman traditions, or a calculated political move to consolidate power and enforce religious conformity? Perhaps it was a combination of both, a desperate attempt to shore up a crumbling empire by demanding absolute loyalty to its ancient ways. The Tetrarchy, for all its initial promise, ultimately proved fragile. Diocletian, remarkably, voluntarily abdicated in 305 CE, compelling Maximian to do the same, hoping to set a precedent for graceful transitions of power. But the system, reliant on the strong personalities of its founders, soon faltered. The Caesars, now Augusti, struggled to maintain the delicate balance, and within a few years, a new round of civil wars erupted. It was during this tumultuous period that a figure of immense historical significance emerged: Constantine, the son of Constantius Chlorus, one of the original Caesars. Constantine's rise to power was a dramatic tale of ambition, military prowess, and a profound shift in religious allegiance. After his father's death in Britain in 306 CE, Constantine was proclaimed Augustus by his troops, setting him on a collision course with the other contenders for imperial power. The decisive moment came in 312 CE, at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome. Facing a larger army led by his rival Maxentius, Constantine reportedly experienced a vision, a sign in the sky, perhaps a Chi Rho symbol, the first two Greek letters of Christ's name, accompanied by the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." Whether this was a genuine, divine revelation, a shrewd political maneuver, or a later embellishment, it marked a turning point. Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields, and against all odds, he achieved a resounding victory, Maxentius drowning in the Tiber. This victory propelled Constantine to the forefront of Roman politics, and set the stage for the Christianization of the empire. While he did not immediately declare Christianity the official state religion, his Edict of Milan in 313 CE, issued jointly with his co-emperor Licinius, granted religious toleration throughout the empire, effectively ending the persecutions and allowing Christians to worship freely. This was a monumental shift, transforming Christianity from a persecuted minority sect into a favored religion. Churches began to be built, Christian clergy received imperial patronage, and the faith began its inexorable rise to dominance. Constantine, a shrewd politician and military strategist, understood the unifying potential of Christianity. He saw in its monotheism and hierarchical structure a framework that could bind together a fractured empire. He actively participated in church affairs, famously convening the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. This ecumenical council, attended by bishops from across the empire, sought to resolve theological disputes, particularly the Arian controversy concerning the nature of Christ. Constantine presided over the council, demonstrating his deep involvement in shaping Christian doctrine and establishing the emperor's role as a protector and patron of the church. This entanglement of imperial power and religious authority would have profound and lasting consequences for both the Roman Empire and the future of Christianity. Constantine also embarked on another monumental undertaking, the founding of a new capital city. Recognizing the strategic advantages of the East, closer to the empire's economic heartland and its most persistent external threats, he chose the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, situated on the Bosporus Strait. In 330 CE, after years of extensive construction, he formally dedicated the city as Nova Roma, or New Rome, though it quickly became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. This new capital, strategically located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, with its easily defensible position and access to vital trade routes, signaled a definitive shift in the empire's center of gravity towards the east. It was adorned with magnificent buildings, churches, and public works designed to rival and even surpass Rome itself. Constantine's reign marked a period of relative stability and profound transformation. He consolidated his power, eventually becoming sole emperor in 324 CE after defeating Licinius. His reforms, building on Diocletian's groundwork, further centralized the imperial bureaucracy and strengthened the military. He continued to mint stable gold coinage, the solidus, which became the standard currency for centuries. His legacy is complex and multifaceted. He was a ruthless military commander, yet also a patron of learning and the arts. He was a traditional Roman emperor, yet also the first to embrace Christianity, setting the stage for its eventual triumph. After Constantine's death in 337 CE, the empire experienced further periods of division and reunification under his successors. The administrative division into East and West, though sometimes blurred, became increasingly pronounced. The two halves developed distinct characteristics. The Western Roman Empire, with its Latin-speaking population, its capital often moving between Rome, Milan and Ravenna, faced relentless pressure from Germanic tribes along its frontiers. Its economy was predominantly agrarian, and its cities, once vibrant, began to decline. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium as it would later be known, was Greek-speaking, wealthier and more urbanized, with its magnificent capital at Constantinople. It benefited from its strategic location, its access to lucrative trade routes, and its more stable political structures. The pressures on the Western Empire intensified throughout the 4th and 5th centuries. Waves of barbarian migrations, driven by the Huns from the east, pushed Germanic tribes like the Goths, Vandals and Franks into Roman territory. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, where the Visigoths decisively defeated and killed Emperor Valens, was a catastrophic blow, demonstrating the vulnerability of the Roman legions. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410 CE, though not the end of the empire, was a profound psychological shock, shattering the myth of Rome's invincibility. The Western Empire, increasingly reliant on barbarian mercenaries and plagued by internal strife, gradually fragmented. Provinces broke away, and new barbarian kingdoms emerged within its former borders. The last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer in 476 CE. This date is traditionally, though somewhat arbitrarily, considered the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, drawn-out process of decline, fragmentation, and transformation. The institutions of the empire slowly faded, replaced by a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms, each with its own customs and laws, though many still look to the legacy of Rome. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued to thrive for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, Greek learning, and Christian faith. It weathered barbarian invasions, developed a sophisticated bureaucracy, and maintained a vibrant economy. It evolved into the Byzantine Empire, a distinct civilization that was both a continuation of Rome and a unique entity in its own right, a beacon of culture and power in the medieval world. The legacy of Diocletian and Constantine, therefore, is immense. Diocletian's administrative reforms, particularly the Tetrarchy, laid the groundwork for the eventual division of the empire. Even if his system didn't last, Constantine's embrace of Christianity and his founding of Constantinople fundamentally reshaped the religious and geopolitical landscape of Europe and the Mediterranean. The administrative split, initially a practical solution to governing a vast empire, ultimately contributed to the divergent paths of East and West. The West slowly dissolved into a new medieval order, while the East, under the banner of Byzantium, carried the torch of Roman civilization forward, a testament to the enduring power of its institutions and the adaptive spirit of its people. The empire, though formally divided, continued to echo across the centuries, its influence shaping the very fabric of the world that followed. A vast network of roads, once arteries of imperial power, now carried whispers of unease. The grand aqueducts, still channeling life-giving water, stood as monuments to an age of unparalleled engineering. Yet beneath their arches, the strains of a weakening empire grew more palpable. By the late 3rd century, the sheer size of the Roman Empire, once its greatest strength, had become a formidable challenge. Its borders stretched across continents, inviting incursions from peoples beyond its traditional frontiers. The Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, who, driven by their own migrations or the lure of Roman wealth, pressed against the legions. The internal fabric of Rome, too, began to fray. Economic instability, marked by rampant inflation and debasement of coinage, eroded the prosperity that had once underpinned its vast infrastructure. The once proud citizen army, increasingly reliant on mercenaries, lost some of its cohesive strength. Political instability became a recurring theme, with emperors rising and falling in rapid succession, often at the whim of their legions. The very notion of Roman identity, once a unifying force, seemed to diffuse as diverse populations were absorbed, and local customs often held sway over distant imperial decrees. One significant shift came with the reign of Diocletian in 284 CE. Recognizing the impossibility of one man effectively governing such an immense territory, he implemented the Tetrarchy, dividing the empire into eastern and western halves, each with its own Augustus and a junior Caesar. This administrative innovation, while initially bringing a measure of stability, subtly reinforced the growing divergence between the Latin-speaking West and the Greek-speaking East. The West, with its agricultural heartland and older cities, faced different challenges than the wealthier, more urbanized East, which commanded crucial trade routes and boasted a more robust economy. Constantine the Great, emerging from the chaos of the Tetrarchy in the early 4th century, further solidified this division, not just administratively, but geographically. His decision to found a new capital, Constantinople, on the strategic Bosporus Strait in 330 CE was a monumental act. This new Rome was built with all the grandeur of the old, but it looked eastward, becoming a powerful centre of trade, culture, and later a distinct form of Christian faith. While the Western Empire still held Rome as its symbolic heart, the true seat of power and future vitality was increasingly shifting to the east. The pressures on the Western Empire intensified throughout the 4th and 5th centuries. The Rhine and Danube frontiers, long guarded by legions, became permeable. In 378 CE, a pivotal moment occurred at the Battle of Adrianople, where the Goths decisively defeated a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. This was not merely a military defeat. It shattered the myth of Roman invincibility and demonstrated the vulnerability of the empire to barbarian incursions. It also highlighted a growing problem: the integration of various Gothic groups within Roman territory, sometimes as allies, sometimes as restless, disaffected forces. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410 CE sent shockwaves across the known world. For over 8 centuries, the city had stood unmolested by foreign invaders. Though the city itself was not utterly destroyed, the psychological impact was immense. It was a clear sign that the heart of the Western Empire was no longer inviolable. This event, perhaps more than any other, signaled a new era of vulnerability and decline. The barbarians were no longer just at the gates. They were within the walls, demanding tribute and territory. The Vandals, crossing into North Africa in 429 CE, established a powerful kingdom there, severing Rome's vital grain supply from its richest province. This loss of North Africa was a catastrophic blow to the Western Empire's economy and its ability to feed its city. Iefs and armies. Without the steady flow of grain, Rome's population dwindled, and its military capacity was further diminished. The once mighty Roman navy, crucial for protecting trade routes, found itself outmatched by Vandal fleets. The arrival of Attila and the Huns in the mid-5th century added another layer of terror and disruption. Though Attila's direct impact on Rome was limited, he famously turned away from the city after a meeting with Pope Leo I in 452 CE. Perhaps due to plague or the lack of supplies, his campaigns destabilized vast regions and pushed more Germanic tribes westward, further straining the already weakened Roman defences. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 CE, where a Roman-Visigothic alliance managed to halt Attila, was one of the last great Roman military victories in the West, a testament to a desperate, fleeting unity against a common foe. Historians still debate the precise fall of the Western Roman Empire. Was it a sudden collapse or a prolonged, gradual transformation? Some argue that the deposition of the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer in 476 CE marks the definitive end. Odoacer simply sent the imperial regalia back to Constantinople, effectively acknowledging the Eastern emperor as the sole legitimate ruler. Yet in many regions, Roman institutions, laws, and even a semblance of Roman culture continued to exist under new Germanic rulers. The local Roman elites often maintained their positions, and the transition was sometimes more of a power transfer than an outright destruction. Other scholars point to earlier dates, such as the sack of Rome in 410 CE, or even later, suggesting that the fall was a process extending well into the 6th century, with the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy maintaining many Roman administrative structures. The concept of Romanness itself was fluid, adapting to new realities. The idea that the empire fell implies a clear, singular event, when in reality it was a complex interplay of economic decline, military overstretch, political instability, barbarian migrations, and the gradual erosion of central authority. The Western Empire fragmented into a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms: the Visigoths in Spain, the Franks in Gaul, the Vandals in North Africa, and the Ostrogoths in Italy. These new kingdoms often adopted Roman administrative practices, Latin as a language of governance, and eventually Christianity. The legacy of Rome, though transformed, lived on in law, language, and the enduring idea of a universal empire. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as the Byzantine Empire after the city of Byzantium, Constantinople's original name, continued to thrive for another 1,000 years. It preserved Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian theology. Its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia allowed it to control vital trade routes, fostering a rich economy. Its formidable walls, particularly the Theodosian walls of Constantinople, proved impregnable to countless sieges, protecting its wealth and culture. The Byzantine Empire developed its own distinct identity, blending Roman traditions with Greek culture and Orthodox Christianity. Its emperors, like Justinian I in the 6th century, launched ambitious campaigns to reconquer lost Western territories, briefly restoring Roman rule to parts of Italy and North Africa. Justinian's legal reforms, codified in the Corpus Juris Civilis, became the foundation of civil law in many European nations, a testament to the enduring influence of Roman legal principles. Even as the West plunged into what historians once termed the Dark Ages, Constantinople remained a beacon of learning, art, and sophisticated governance. Its diplomatic prowess, its advanced military tactics, and its cultural achievements, such as the Hagia Sophia, stood in stark contrast to the often turbulent landscape of Western Europe. The story of Rome, therefore, does not end with a single dramatic collapse, but rather with a profound transformation. One half of the empire slowly dissolved into a new mosaic of kingdoms, while the other endured, evolving into a distinct and powerful civilization that carried the torch of Roman legacy for centuries to come. A testament to the enduring power of its foundations, even as the world around it reshaped itself.